Hey, let's go. Now we need a back. Oh, she was doing that.
Yeah, but you can see. Yeah.
But she'll come. Yeah.
Can you put your password? She needs to put in your password. Yeah.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Wow, you just told the world.
Wow.
Plus the people in the live.
Right? Oh my God. Now I have to change it.
That's just be a one day again. Motivation to definitely.
She's here.
Okay.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening, Tessa.
For those of you who don't know me, my name is Tessa Bahana. I'm the director here at 32 Degrees East, and I have a cold. So sorry, I sound like this is my.
Give it up for Tessa.
Oh, thank you. We are delighted to host the homecoming edition of the African Decor Edits book launch. Written by the amazing Nasozi Kakembo. So thank you so much for having us be your hosts for this book's arrival here in Kampala. So this is a premiere exclusive event, okay? These very fresh books are here for purchase. They make excellent gifts as well in case you already have a copy. But you don't have a copy, so this is exclusive. And let me keep it short. We are going to have a wonderful conversation between Rasheeda Nalumoso, who is here representing Creators Connect, which is also debuting in a way. So she'll share more about that. And it's also a conversation open to you all, so there'll be some time between them and then opening up for questions and additional conversation from the amazing people we have gathered here today. As I said, I have a cold, it's affecting my brain a bit. So I'm going to hand over to the people we came to listen to today. Maybe just again for people who are new to the space, the bathrooms are located down this corridor, so the last door on the right. And as mentioned, there's water and other drinks and samosas available for purchase, and also amazing other things available for purchase. So we are supporting artisans, artists, and storytelling today. So really, really looking forward to this evening. Thank you again for being here and for being with us. And welcome you all.
Thank you everyone for joining us this evening. I'm so delighted to be here for the launch of the African Decor Edit. I'm Rasheeda Nalumoso, I'm a cultural and creative producer. I'm here representing Creators Connect with my also co-founder Brendan Windy, who represents some guerrilla sats in his own right, doing some amazing things with tourism and Bitcoin. Creators Connect is an umbrella body to support and advocate for artists across the diaspora and the continent, and particularly homegrown here in Uganda. And we've been doing a couple of events, creating platforms, new networks and advocacy, particularly to support the growing creative economy across the continent. And the diaspora is really an important part of that in terms of also my co-founder, our other co-founder, Rachel Bashabe, who's not with us today, but is based in London and works across Uganda and Kampala. And I believe has already put in an order, Nasozi put in an order for an outfit from her, which is wonderful, keeping the connections growing. So to introduce Nasozi, and really it is such a pleasure to again acknowledge we don't often get new launches for any book. It's not easy to publish at all, and so it's so delightful to be marking the launch of it here in Kampala, Uganda, and I think that's so fantastic. Nasozi Kakembo is a designer, author and arts advocate. Her debut book, which we have with us today, published by Abrams Publishing, is The African Decor Edit. Founder of XN Studio, a lifestyle without borders, which is an interior design and product design practice located in Brooklyn and Kampala, founded in 2011. Nasozi credits her Ugandan heritage as central to her artistic inspiration. It's a delight for me to be in conversation with Nasozi today. We'll be in dialogue with a Q&A for about 40 minutes or so, and then I'll open up for questions, which I hope we have with our audience. So really, Nasozi, welcome. And
thank you. And I also want to give a quick thank you to Rasheeda for, hosting and really continuing and leading a fantastic charge here in Uganda and beyond Uganda, throughout East Africa, to really bring a voice and tell the stories of the creative sector and industry. So that's in part what brought us together, but we actually met completely, through Tessa as friends at a dinner about 3 years ago, and I think I was here working on a certain portion of the book. But I've known Tessa for even longer, for 5 years, 5+. We met right before the pandemic, one time I was passing through, and we met through a very good mutual friend who I used to work with in New York. So this is full circle in so many ways. And I knew as soon as the book deal was the ink was dry, that it would lead me back to this place, which had been under construction the last time I was here. But I knew in some way, shape, or form that this would be the homecoming space and place. So thank you all for being here for this very special occasion for me and for our friends and partners.
yes, how we tell stories. I wanted to invite Nasozi to share more about her practice, her ethos, her relationship to the publication of the African Decor edit. How we tell stories really matters. And I wanted to start with the personal, and even just how you've described that full circle moment is really much part of it. And it's wonderful to be here today at 32 Degrees East, the home of artists in Uganda and beyond. Can you locate your personal history to the positioning of African Decor edit, and how you have approached thinking through the historical legacies of the textile ecology in the opportunity of this new publication? I'd invite you to comment on that.
Okay, thank you. We can advance the slide, please. So my slides I attempted to put them in order of the conversation. So this will just kind of set our scope of what the question that Rasheeda has just asked and beyond. So for this book, and actually let me pass this around so you can even flip through as we're having the conversation, and the slideshow. There's also the library copy that's floating around. But I cover 9 countries in the book, but 16 artisans in total. And it was very important for me to cover all 5 geographic regions of the continent. Obviously, I couldn't go to every country, or even within every country, there are so many artistic and creative heritage, traditions, and customs. So I really had to decide and edit, hence the name, the African Decor edit down what I was going to showcase and research, and really put my resources and attention toward. So one of those filters was geography, making sure to cover each of those 5 geographic regions generally in equal proportion. So there were 16 artisan interviews. Then the second portion of the book is dedicated to interiors, where I'm showcasing African decor at home all over the world. So part of that thesis in the ethos is African decor can belong to everybody. I lay out the ways in which we can ethically incorporate and invite them into our homes if we're not of African descent or of Cameroonian descent. As Ugandans, Africa is not a country, so we also have different ways that we can incorporate and be mindful of incorporating other cultural heritage objects into our homes and our lives. And so those homes span from the United States to Europe, and it was also very important for me to include homes in Africa. So I feature a home in Ghana, it's actually a 2-part home. It's partially in Accra, partially in Kukrubite, and this is my aunt's home, in fact, who moved to Ghana from the United States almost 30 years ago and studied an art institute there, partial residency, which I've also studied at. I studied batik there and then finished and wrote some of my book there. And then the second country is Morocco, Also very intentional because some storytellers like to exclude Morocco from the continent, and I no, Morocco is Africa as well. So that was important for me to include both from the artisan perspective and the home decor perspective. Next slide, please. So in terms of how all of this fits or how I fit into this, it starts with really my family. These are all really old photographs from the 80s. There's my dad there, and you can see some of them. Dr. Henry Grace Kakembo, and you'll see him in a few photos. You'll see my mother. That's one of my brothers in the top. But in each one of those photos I selected because it shows part of my heritage in our home growing up. I'm Baganda, and all self-respecting Baganda households have, our hide on the wall. So, it went off. So you see that in our homes from Germany, where my parents met, and eventually to the United States, where I was raised. In the middle on the bottom, you can see my mom with our typical kind of tote bag that we have here, and that was made here. So there's always been an effort in the home that I grew up in to showcase and incorporate our heritage proudly. And this was for many years not the only way that I was able to access our stories and identity, because I grew up outside of Washington, D.C., where in fact there's a large Ugandan community. So I grew up very much in the Ugandan community there, but in terms of also what's home, we were proudly showcasing cultural heritage objects at home, and objects that could remind me and tell me the story of that part of my heritage. So it was always a normalized thing for me, but as I was continuing, in my own practice and studies and interests in the design and creative space, wasn't seeing that reflected back so much in the books, in the magazines, in the offerings, in the store. And when they were there, they weren't being told or being sold by an African. So that's the entry point into Accent Studio and the book.
Yeah, and I think you're perfectly well placed. I mean, I found it so powerful and moving, the very personal story that you meet in the very first few pages of the African Decor edit. You share your family photos, and you talk through that fluidity of even through your own upbringing, of how you've always been engaging with the continent, and that kind of storytelling positions you so well, I think, to be the right author for this publication. It's very personal, and it's you bringing that. I think that narrative is, I really appreciate it through the conceit of particularly the 16 stories and the way you're showcasing the continent that we just don't see in a textile home decor publication. This is quite a unique narrative approach, and it's beautiful. This is Uganda. This is legacy. This is storytelling.
Right.
How do you see the African Decor edit as a tool for a different relation with cultural appropriation and erasure that does center often Africa's contribution? Well, actually, usually, I mean, it's cultural appropriation and erasure has obviously marginalized Africa's contribution to the textile ecology that I think we can all agree, and also has erupted the value chain contribution that the continent can make now. And I'd like you to comment on that with your work that you've led through your career with the Mokono Foundation, and if you could speak to the audience around what you've been doing there, because I see that that's also what you brought into even the lens of storytelling with this publication.
I think we can advance. At this point, okay, good. Mokono, there we go. Good finding. So the Mokono Foundation, again, it started out as a charitable foundation. Prior to me founding Accent Studio, I worked in a range of development and philanthropic, international development and philanthropic work for, probably close to a decade between internships. I studied international urban planning in graduate school, and then I worked for a major international philanthropy. And in all of those permutations, whether it was bilateral giving or philanthropic giving, I found opportunities for, at the time I wasn't planning to start my own foundation, but I was observing, inefficiencies and opportunities to do something better, in part because I was so close at times to the issues, the quote unquote issues that they were trying to resolve or have a hand in. And in the background, to an extent, was also not what we formally call philanthropy, but very much so a form of customary giving that I saw through the form of remittances and what my own family and many of our families, if not all of our families, have done for decades, if not centuries, whether that's within our own country or from the US, UK, abroad, sending money back home. And we don't call it philanthropy, which is a very self-congratulatory framing, I think. But if we really look definitionally, that's what it is. So once I realized, when we're, sharing our resources from the US to help out with school fees or to help out with a medical bill, that's philanthropy. But again, it's not in this formalized sense. So I realized, okay, well, this is actually what we've been doing all along. If I create a formal entity around it, then I can get other people's money and we can do even more. In terms of the charitable component, which for me was really just the beginning. I don't consider charity the end goal. It's a means to an end. And so that said, I came to Uganda on one trip. This was in 2015. We were here. I dropped my son. That was, I think, his second or third time. And I was, speaking with my cousins and my family, just describing an organization that I wanted to partner with. And whether it be, education, I know I wanted to focus on the youth because I believe that's where the biggest change can happen. And so, we actually went around to a few different organizations around Kampala. And then I think on the last day, one of my cousins said, "Oh, well, there's a school, an orphanage school, right over there." We were at our home in Mukono and Namande, and pointed to the other side of the valley. And so we walked to the school, and I met the director, Ezra. These pictures are not from that trip. This was some years later, but just the conversation that I had with Ezra, the fact that I could, have immediate access to the executive director, and he could tell me exactly what they needed, as opposed to me dictating what I believed that they should do. And so my whole financial model was essentially a percentage of the home decor company, the proceeds, a percentage of the proceeds would be donated back to Subi School through the Mukono Foundation. And through the Mukono Foundation, I could also host and conduct fundraising activities. So that's the idea there. And Mukono Foundation has since evolved into more of this advocacy piece, arts advocacy. So trying to advocate for more awareness around the cultural heritage, even at the primary and secondary educational level. But then also now, as you brought up the portion about, and I think we can advance. We'll go back and then we're gonna go forward, because actually we can keep going.
Forward or back?
Forward, sorry, yeah. Again. Okay, we could stop here. So, as I, had on the design side, the interior design side in particular, began noticing, as I was looking for products from as I was looking for African decor products, noticed our cultural heritage being essentially stolen, the design stolen and reproduced outside of Africa entirely. So primarily being produced in India, Southeast Asia, Asia Pacific. Seeing cultural heritage objects and quote unquote African decor being showcased in magazines with completely no context or name in the caption, or a very like reductive name, or spoken about in a reductive fashion. So again, that's partially what led me to this book. Like, I'm gonna write about African people, things, objects in the way that I believe we should be spoken about and referred to, because I continue to be disappointed and wanting more in the way that media, design media, I'll focus on design media, but this is an at-large media program or problem, but the way that design media talks about and speaks about Africans. So, and when I say Africans, I mean really like the whole continent, the whole place. So in Cameroon, this is one of the artisans in the book. He focuses on wooden sculptures, and these stools are very popular in interior design. But next slide, his name is Honoré. These are some screenshots. The middle and then the right are instances of US-based companies, large companies. Serena and Lily, I don't see the other one. I think World Market, notorious for copying African cultural heritage objects and producing them in Asia and then selling them at a tremendous profit. And these are only 2 instances, and these are, you can see how much they're going for. One of the tables is 600 US, the one on the far right is over $2,000 US. And what's so egregious about these instances, at least the one in particular from Serena and Lily, is that not only have they stolen the design, but they literally call it Bamileke. And when I actually wrote to the company as a curious potential customer and asked them, and I knew they did not make this in Cameroon. I knew I could actually look at it and tell, but I wanted to get this on the record. So I wrote to them like, hey, I'm just curious, where is this made? And they wrote me back, and because the information in the listing doesn't even tell you where it's from, it just says imported. So that's always a red flag too, and I list that, I talk about that in the framework. But I asked them, they wrote back, and it's made in the Philippines. So this is now with the Mukono Foundation, through through the expertise that we've been able to accrue, we advocate for this to not happen. And we're leveraging legal frameworks in the United States, because that is where these are sold, and that's really the domain where we can hold these companies accountable, leveraging legal frameworks there so that they can't do this anymore through intellectual property rights. So that's been the evolution of the Mukono Foundation in short.
Fascinating. And these companies have no shame.
Exactly.
No shame.
It's infuriating.
Wow.
It's infuriating.
And I think you're pointing towards, even the publication I see is a solutioning, and definitely legal right, pushing for trade, IP protection is really important to be able to hold companies accountable. What is it we are trying to achieve in terms of success for ethical trade? What does success look like? And I think lobbying in that way is one, and calling it out when it's seen, when it's noticed, and that it's not okay, and also trying to find different alternatives of trade, which I think you're doing in terms of your network building. But what does it look like for you?
Okay, and I think we can probably advance. I don't know what's on the next, but let's see. Oh, that's just this is just another example of now the appropriation of Abibo being made in India, and they even have the really fluffy talk around social contribution and really heartwarming. They show a child labor, what's happening. But visually, we look at these and we know where these designs are coming from. We know that these are made in East Africa, in Uganda, Kenya, Rwanda. We know that that's the source, and then we get here, we look into details. At least here they tell us handcrafted in India, whereas some websites will really bury the information, or they won't include it, they'll obscure it. But this is not Indian cultural heritage. And so for each basket that's made there and sold, that's income away from a Ugandan maker, that's income away from an African artisan, that's income away, an economic opportunity away from an African. And so for what success looks like for me is diverting that, getting these people, getting these, again, because legal frameworks can only reach so far, and there are international protections, but they're not necessarily, they're not enforceable. It's like, like so much that's happening now. If you look at of course I have to bring in politics because I'm from living in the DC area, but so much of even our constitutional crisis is because it's like, oh, well, that's just a suggestion. Like, you don't actually have to do that. You don't actually have to follow the rules. Well, that's what a lot of these legal frameworks are also like, unless, the company and the offender and X and Y and Z are located within a designated legal domain. And so that's why I've been leveraging, and what I think too is one of those, as now an official dual citizen of US and Uganda, but as a US citizen, I can leverage that to protect and collaborate with artisans, not just even just in Uganda, but I've been pursuing international property rights for artisans in Cameroon, on behalf of Honore, artisans in Mali, because that's where the legal framework opportunity is. So in this instance, what success looks like for me is that either they can produce all that they want. I don't have any say or opportunity to stop what people are doing in India, but we can stop on the end user side. We can say you can't sell these in America because now these are banned or protected, or this is, you have to go through these avenues. And if they do, then they need to be giving a certain percentage to the artisans in Uganda. That's what they want to do. But ultimately, success would be they're not selling that, and that there are artisans with those networks, with the infrastructure to produce and supply and supply the companies in the US and globally who want to sell these goods. So
I agree. Coming to the end user, and I think what you point out in the publication in a very simple ways, often through the personal and the professionals who you've chosen to include around the purchasing power that they have around how we can be conscious as consumers, and the framework that you have, even just a very simple conceit of an ethical framework to support purchasing in approaching being ethical, in approaching African decor, to help guide, I think, anyone who is interested in being ethical. Without it being, I also appreciate, without it being like a stick to beat the consumer with, because it is sometimes, even to enter into that conversation can be difficult, and some people will shy away from it, but I feel like the way you guide us in through the publication, you hold our hand, you introduce us through the direct stories and the direct quotes of individuals of, like, what struck me was the example of, or just simple examples of just interrogating a little bit further around the history of this particular object is going back one step further, and you're doing your due diligence. So thinking about mindset value, have we dealt with the colonial hierarchy in relation to taste, purchasing power, and mindset value there?
So I'm trying to think which slide I want to have up while we talk to that. Maybe go backwards a couple. Let's stay, yes, let's stay there. There's Judith. I don't know if Judith, can Judith see? There she is. Do you see yourself? Judith is in the middle of the top. Judith is my right-hand woman in Kampala, and we've been in business together for 10 years. We've actually been going on 10 years. We've been through a pandemic, we've been through so much, but she's like my quality control manager. She's like she's the one. So in this picture here, she's with Agnes on her right, and Agnes is the Abibo artisan who I interview and speak with in the book. And yeah, they were, I forgot which order, or maybe that time was just for footage, I don't remember, but this was November of 2021. Yeah. Yes, this was November 2020, or even maybe during. It was still during COVID. Not the worst part of COVID, but It was 2020 or 2021 when we did that. So anyway, so I wanted to hold this photo here while we discuss that question about the colonial hierarchy. Because, so in addition to the photo with Judith, who's producing an order to send to me in the US, and then you have my cousin's wedding where the baskets are being used, and then you have one of the baskets that I got from Judith, it's featured in a prominent US magazine called In Style magazine. You can see it in the magazine at the top right of the page. And when I juxtapose these because I believe so earnestly that the value proposition starts with us. And this is also partially what came up during the panel, the Creative Hustlers panel with Tushi the other day and the myth, in terms of us first as African people appreciating and valuing our traditions, culture, material, identity, names, looks, everything about us. We have to appreciate that first. We have to value that first and unapologetically. And not only is there an inherent value in that, but even by sheer numbers, if we all believe it, the rest of the world will get in line. The rest of the world will get in line. They wouldn't be coming here. The rest of the world would not be, and this is not a new phenomenon. This is a centuries-old phenomenon, millennia-old phenomenon. If there weren't valuable people, places, things, culture here in Africa, then the world would not have their hands in Africa at all. But part of the dynamic and the systemic kind of upside down that has been taking place in order to exploit what's here has been first convincing us that all of those things are not valuable. We are not valuable. We are not good enough. Our language, our culture is devaluing to then turn around, call it something else, and take it away, and then assign a new value and assign a new marketing pitch, and then it becomes this other thing. And so, to an extent, I won't say the hierarchy has been shifted, but even within that phenomenon, like there are people who are not from here who do have a genuine appreciation for and interest in and want to be ethically engaged. And so I think it's an interesting thing, like what Tushi pointed out at the event the other day was, there was, I think, a German woman who had on a kitenge dress, and she said, you know, like, if this woman can wear our clothing, like, why do we feel like our clothing is not good enough for us? And I find that it's the same thing with decor. It's the same thing with design. It's the same thing with how even into architecture, like, we seem to be looking at other countries. We're looking at Dubai or looking at the United States. And I'm like, no, that's, you know, at least in Dubai, maybe it's appropriate to that climate, to that context, to that situation. But I see even some of the new buildings going up, not just here, but in other parts of the continent. And I'm just like, that makes no sense. Like, it doesn't even work with the climate. It doesn't even work with the sun. But it looks like what an American building is supposed to look like. And if you're watching what's happening there in the weather and in the climate, like, not even the homes in the U.S. are properly built for that, for that environment, are not environmentally responsive. I think we're in a space, we are in a space right now that I'm completely obsessed with, because of the way that it has sourced local materials, and it is in conversation with the environment in a way that is not only sustainable but beautiful. And it's a testament, and it says, no, our materials, our expertise, the way that we can reference what we have already around us can become a real thing. And that was also why it was so important for me to have this conversation in this space. So I think that value piece, you know, we have to unapologetically stand on it. And then work with and collaborate with people around the world who already believe that, because if they didn't believe that, they wouldn't be coming here.
I agree, and there's a critical mass opportunity there, and I was watching, even saw something today around the pushback of, or cancellation of DEI in America, but actually the purchasing power is with the Black and African-American diaspora community, so that's not going to be possible, because, agree about critical mass.
Yeah.
Moving to consider design, because you yourself are a designer, and we are also in the home of artists here at 32. How have you navigated around working as a designer, also with artisans, and supporting that kind of collaboration? Can you share more about what that design process has even looked like? Because I guess you've been across the whole spectrum from what that might, and I think that then in terms of this conversation of trade, but now I want to talk about you, the designer, in that engagement with artisans.
Yeah. So maybe go back one to Amisi. Let's find Amisi. We can even stay. Yeah, we can stay there. Did we do this one already? No. No, okay. Then we'll stay there. So Amisi, Judith introduced me to Amisi during the pandemic. This was, in fact, so Amisi is holding, and I brought it here. This is why I brought it. Amisi is holding one of these, a trivet, for hot plates and pots and pans, or to just put up on your wall for decoration in between uses. So I brought this because this is one of the items that really captures the creative collaboration process and embodies my philosophy and ethos of Accent Studio, which is creating contemporary products from traditional knowledge and expertise, and in this instance, and materials. So in this instance, this is this wood trivet made from acacia wood and cow horn, handmade by Amisi, who was of Congolese descent, I think born and raised in Burundi, and then eventually moved to Uganda, to Kampala, which at the time, I think he said he had been living in Kampala for 12 years. And there's an entire profile on him in the book. And so, I pay very close attention to not just like how I live and the conveniences. I try to also incorporate, or I do also incorporate a utilitarian component into a lot of the objects that I design. So how can they, so how can I create an object that is not just beautiful, but useful? Because if it's useful, then we'll have it in our lives for a while, and we'll want to gift it, and we'll want to give it to people. So again, the trivet, it has a functional purpose, but it can also just be a pretty object around your home. So created this idea to develop and design this concept, reached out to Judith. I had already been sourcing the salad servers from her for years. So we thought about, and she'd heard of this really excellent wood carver on the other side of town who, I initially just sent her a picture in dimensions on WhatsApp, really just sketches. That's how we've done so much of our designing together. And she took the picture to him. He created a couple samples. He sent them back with my dad. And then I got to check it out, inspect it, and then we put them into production. So, and I put them on my website, accentstudio.com. So maybe a few months later, Bon Appetit magazine, like the preeminent, cuisine and food and dining magazine, featured it in their holiday gift guide. And they went on to feature this at least 1 or 2 more years. So this has been featured in Bon Appetit for a couple of years. And so as soon as it came out in the gift guide, which was I think October or November, so a few months before the holiday itself, the orders started coming in. And I actually had to reorder and send another purchase order request to Judith and Amisi on a couple of occasions. And so I'm also producing, usually in small batches, because he's doing the pieces one by one. There, I think he's making one of the round bits. But these are not for mass production, but for the right customer, they also understand that. They pay for that exclusivity. And at one point, a friend of mine who was in marketing, he was like, your price is too low. He's like, I bet if you increase it by, I don't know if it was 5 or 10, the orders will keep coming in. And I was kind of skeptical, but I did, and I still sold out. So again, to the value, it's like if we're asserting the value and attaching the story to it, because of all of my marketing descriptions online, I'm showing Amisi, I'm talking about the process. Those customers want, and they're paying for that story. They're paying for that authenticity. The customers who are shopping on Amazon and paying, a fraction of the cost for an Abibo, they're less concerned with it. They just maybe don't know. That's part of it. But even going back to your question about the book as a tool, the book is also a very practical reference. So people can look and say, oh, this is what mudcloth is. This is what an authentic Ugandan basket is. This is what an authentic Bamileke stool is. Or even to know the names. So this, is part of that whole that whole bit. Like, we're designing together, we're creating together, we're adding value together, we're advocating, we're promoting, we're getting the press, we're really raising the profile of Ugandans and Ugandan artistry and craftsmanship and expertise, and selling it globally.
I really appreciate the publication takes us through that circular economy that you've essentially built entirely built to the opportunity of the network that you've built. And I think the attention to the individual artisan particularly is so relevant and pertinent, because that's what we don't usually get to hear. And Judith here today, we're very happy to have Judith, because it's also the face behind your long-term collaborator that stands in equal presence, essentially.
Very much.
And I think it's very, also what you highlight, I'm not sure if it was a Misi story, but there was another individual whose story we were just discussing the other day, struck me also around, you acknowledge the precarity of a lot of the livelihoods of the artisans who you work with. And so if you're intentionally not looking for large-scale orders, but the difficulty of sometimes going back to an artisan for orders, and if we know there's no guarantees around workshop space, and
yes.
It's a whole different environment of being an artisan in Uganda, in Kampala, and no guarantees around that kind of livelihood sustainability. Right. So how have you also had to navigate that? We were even just discussing.
Yeah. So in fact, it was Amisi also who we were discussing, and during the conversation that I document in the book, and I also want to stress that the book is really just a snapshot of a moment in time. So much has changed in the 3 years since I was, conducting my research and the photographs for this book. And this was in fact almost 3 years ago to the day. I was here at the same exact time 3 years ago. And unfortunately, Amisi fell on hard circumstances. He had plans to expand his studio and begin training local children in the neighborhood on his craftsmanship, so that they had other, opportunities and skills to pursue this field of work as well. And unfortunately, his uncle, who, and this is even not too far from here, I passed by the other day coming back from the airport, but his uncle, who had a amazing, and there's a picture of the uncle. Actually, let me open it while we're here.
I think it was in Zambia, that a work store, and they moved here 10 years ago from the Congo.
Exactly.
Contributing to society here.
So his uncle was owning or renting that space. His uncle was the main one on that space, and Amisi was utilizing the space above his uncle, and the uncle passed away. This is the uncle here. If you have the book around, it's on page 65. But you can even see there are beautiful Congolese artifacts and art and objects and sculptures behind the uncle, and even in Amisi's workshop upstairs. But the uncle passed away, and when the uncle passed away, it threw the entire physical space into jeopardy, and Amisi had to leave And so when he left, he had to leave almost everything in his workshop, and he couldn't provide for his family, and he fell on hard times. And actually, the last we heard, I think he had left for Kenya because people were, going after him for certain things. So, in one instant, almost the course of his life changed because he didn't have, legal claim or the resources necessarily to keep that place, which had the materials for his livelihood inside, so he couldn't produce. So again, bringing it even to 32, that's what makes 32 Degrees East here. That's what makes spaces like this so crucial and so critical. Even just providing physical space for our, to be able to do our work and experiment and explore, and to see our vision through. This is an essential resource, and really an amazing resource to have here in Kampala for artisans and artists.
That brings me to the end of my questions. I'm going to open up to the audience for comments, questions, provocations, and just thank you, Nasozi. It's been wonderful to be in dialogue with you.
Thank you, Rasheeda. Likewise. Thank you.
So we have the mic, and happy to take a round of questions.
You already asked all the questions earlier.
Thank you so much for making it possible when we work with these artists, because it's amazing just being part of their story and what it does. The question I had for you, and you highlighted a lot of it, but it's deeper to the level of what already exists that you find just immediately within all these artisans that is already being cashed in or cashed out in the markets that you're in, that they don't realize that they can start to leverage tomorrow.
I think one of the major points that artisans can leverage is really understanding, again, for me, like the utilitarianism of an object is of anything, because even in my life, I'm a very practical. I like to think of myself as a very practical person. But one of the tenets of sales and marketing is, how will this thing improve my life? And that can be in a physical way, but even if it inspires a feeling or it teaches you something, that's also in essence a tangible improvement. That is a form of improvement in somebody's life. But given, again, like bridging the creativity in the object with the market, because we're talking here about trade and we're talking here about commerce, the object has to be relevant to your consumer. And so I think too, that's where it's also very crucial for that conversation and that dialogue to be continuing, because I'm saying, well, here in America, we're not going to use that. We don't want it to do that. Like that's the feedback that I can give and say, well, like, let's think about it like this. And what, starting my business, but I was like just collecting them as gifts to bring back to friends. Which was, again, one of those ways where I realized, like, oh, there's a market for this, because people can say, oh, can you bring me back more tea? Can you bring me back Uganda tea? When I tell you, I have a cult following online of people who love Uganda tea. Like, the orange box that's in the grocery store. The customer, and they would even be buying it from me in the UK, like sending orders. The cost for shipping was more than the tea itself, and these people would buy it every year. They would buy it. So, again, understanding like what that bridge is, what can we make that is relevant to that context, wherever that is, and vice versa. The same thing when if people are selling things here, like, well, what makes sense to sell in Kampala? What makes sense to sell in Jinja? What makes sense to sell in Addis? Because depending on, for so many reasons, even environmentally, depending on where you live and how you're living, even New York City, like I lived in New York for 12 years, there are certain things in New York that just don't make sense anywhere else. Like everybody has a cart for their groceries because you go to the grocery store and then you have to walk a long distance back home. Nobody's driving in New York. But a grocery cart, I hadn't even seen one before I moved to New York, because in the suburbs, like, you just drive everywhere. Now people get their groceries delivered. So, you know, if you're trying to sell a grocery cart in Silver Spring, Maryland, nobody's gonna buy it from you. So knowing and kind of that market research, market analysis in a way, I think is what the artisans and artists throughout the continent can be, you know, cued in on. And one of the main ways that happens is in partnerships with people abroad and people around, in that mutual collaboration and understanding.
I really like the example of the tea when we discussed that. There's something really interesting, just that it's tea. It's just Ugandan tea, but that was selling out on your website, and it's something about, I mean, people know they want it from you. So that market, you've built also that community of interest around what it is they're looking for when they're coming to look at your website. But also I think it also gives me heart around thinking about this value add. There's so much opportunity within just thinking about our sheer cultural heritage that we can go further around, like packaging, supporting market access from the perspective of like being an artisan in relation with the wider market, because that was just Ugandan tea. And we know it's good, guys. Right. It is really good. Ugandan tea doesn't, and yet I've also had this conversation with Kisubi Tea, the lady who has a great brand of Kisubi Tea, by the way. But we're not selling our tea at the rate that we should be in Uganda. We're underselling ourselves, but it's just as good as, and actually Kenyan tea often is Ugandan tea, by the way. So there's lots more that we need to be really recognizing our value and understanding how we're then, offering it not only internally to our markets here, but beyond as an opportunity, because there's still so much more to grow in that space.
I think the first thing is more of like an observation, but then the question I have two. The first one is, maybe you were talking about efforts to create some sort of like protected status for work that comes from particular regions. So, for example, like the tables for Cameroon. Yes. So I wonder what your experience has been like specifically with things like I know that, for example, like champagne has some sort of like trademark protection, which I think is negotiated by France, but also the European Union. That means that even though anyone can sell a sparkling wine, only a few people can call it champagne if they meet very specific criteria. And I wonder, like, if you've had any experience trying to push for something like that, because of course you can't really control what someone makes in Manila and the Philippines, but maybe you can control what they call it. And I don't know who, in your experience, who has the power to push for something like that. Is it a government thing? Is it a thing private people can do? But my second question, which I think is a bit more nebulous, is in terms of the value that cultural heritage has, especially objects like this, what has been, of course there's experience of kind of attaching this extra value to it through a commercial exchange, making the baskets or the weavings here and then taking them to the Americas. But do you think that there is any, like what do you think is the potential for that to have an impact here that is not simply monetary? Because I think sometimes there's this assessment of things that it is our culture and has this value because we can attach this price to it when we sell it overseas. But, for example, is there an effort to also introduce some of these things into the market? Here, in conjunction, like these artisans are making all this stuff, but it also has the capability of becoming more ubiquitous in Ugandan homes, of kind of attacking that preset idea of Western or colonial things being better.
Right.
And have you had some experience with maybe trying to disseminate these ideas beyond the book? I think the book is a really good start, but disseminate these ideas even within those places, that these things you make have great value, and not only because people buy them, but also because they are a representation of the art and the culture of the space in which it exists.
Yeah, those are both excellent questions. Thank you for raising those points. I'll start with your second question first, and then I might need a refresher when we go back to the first. So in short, I mean, the book is really my first major haul, and I think most significant effort to demonstrate and to kind of say, I wrote this book for us. I wrote this book for Africans. I wrote this book to show, okay, this was a tremendous investment. This is the first book of its kind. I have major backing from a preeminent publishing house that's based in the US and based in the UK. Again, that's not really asserting the value just because it's those houses, but that's where I could get the funding to then do whatever I wanted. Honestly, they gave me carte blanche to construct this book, and it had a lot to do with the fact that by the time I brought the proposal to the publisher with my agent, I had already established myself as an authority and an expert in the ethical design and decor space for Africa specifically. To the extent that there were already books or people doing something kind of similar, they were never African. So the publisher was also very hungry and eager to support, because also for them, I think it's also important to understand, they need me as much as I need them. I'm giving them the legitimacy. I'm giving them, now they can say they have a whole African decor book in their portfolio written by an African. So by putting these objects, just by virtue of having it, I think, in a book and promoting it, being here in conversation, I think that's, it's a big step, but it's also, I think, really the first one to asserting and kind of planting the flag on this side. And I would love to have more of these conversations around the continent and around the continent, around Africa. I would love to, at least at a minimum, go to all of the countries where I've had these conversations. But to an extent, logistically, in terms of my resources, one angle that I'm going to be pursuing more in earnest when I get back to the States and get back to Washington, where I'm based, is approaching more of the embassies, because I think now, and kind of reaching into your other question, is that the governments do have a role to play in these protections. As citizens, we can pursue these legal framework, these legal protections. I, in fact, filed for protection for Honore in Cameroon for the protection of the Bamileke name. And I'm in fact supposed to be hearing back on that application any day now. I'm constantly checking my email for hopefully an approval from the U.S. Patent and Trade Office. But it shouldn't be me. Fortunately, I have his best interest in mind and heart. But somebody else, I could have run that search in the database of all of the patented and trademarked names and copywritten names, and somebody else could have already owned that name. They very much, but nobody had laid claim to it yet. So it was just out in the ether. And meanwhile, you have companies, I think Serena and Lily's based in California, they're not owned, again, no association to Africa, they're not giving back any of those proceeds. to the Bamileke people in Cameroon. So they just have, free reign to do whatever they want until that legal protection is secured. So if you ask me the same question in 2 weeks, I might actually formally have that. And then they will have the option to, if you want to continue using this, then you are licensing the name. You have to pay for this name. And then that money goes back to the communities. I think there is a balance to strike with involving the governments, because so many of, and I speak to this too in the different sections, there's a range in terms of the support that the respective governments offer to the artisan, or even acknowledge the artisan industry. We know the context here. There's very little to speak of that support. Morocco, there's a lot more support to speak of coming from the government and even acknowledgement. The Ministry of Tourism and Cultural Affairs in Cameroon, they exist, but they're not actually doing anything. So I think the government could leverage more. And I think once they actually understand the $1 trillion that the creative sector is actually producing in Africa totally, then they might be more keen. But then it's like, okay, where is that money going to begin being siphoned off? So the government may or may not be the answer, but in the meantime, we actually can, either as individuals or entities that we set up, advocate on behalf of artisans and cultural heritage around the world. I hope that answers some of your question.
And I think on the point around maybe the mindset that you were kind of asking around, I think, and then what was also I found important in feeling that how this book is very culturally grounded, and I think you're paying attention to the ecosystem of the artisans who are reflected in it, and that it's not, what I find is it's not just around a marketplace of purchase, but also an attention to the livelihoods that they're creating in their own ecosystem. So I think that point around, we definitely agree, we all need to be ideally consuming accessibly priced, culturally grounded products made in Uganda and decorating them in our homes and being able to celebrate them without feeling like that's exclusive or just not for you because I want to import something from, why are we reaching for imported products when we've got our very own here? So definitely there's a thing around mindset, but I think what you're drawing attention to also is an attention to just that artisan story, which I think is an answer to Noel's provocation there around what success might look like around how we navigate, I guess, here and abroad.
And I do actually want to quickly say, I've actually been very impressed and inspired by the hospitality industry design here. Like there are certain restaurants and hotels and other venues in the hospitality industry that I feel that's growing and that do utilize cultural heritage in the design. And that's one of the things I look forward to the most when I'm coming back here, because I see it much more in that angle than I do in residential. But there's a lot to be inspired by and appreciate that there's pride there. Even in the middle here, if you go back one, in the middle, and actually even over to the right, those are both hotels. The middle is in Cameroon. Those are the Babelake stools in Cameroon in a very prominent, popular hotel called Hotel Zingana. And then on the right-hand side, that is a hotel in Johannesburg. I believe that was Johannesburg. And those are Binga and Tonga baskets on the wall, which are not South African, but they're from the region. They're from Zambia, Zimbabwe. And then you also have Kuba cloth pillows. So again, like very proudly and unapologetically saying, like, this is our cultural heritage, or even from the region. Again, South Africa is not Zimbabwe or Zambia, but we don't do border objects without borders. Lifestyle without borders is my accent tagline. And this is an example of how even our objects and our knowledge and our cultural heritage can be appreciated outside of the place that they come from. But this is obviously done, the one in South Africa is done in a very like regal and unapologetic way. So I think I want to give, kudos to the hospitality industry for incorporating the cultural heritage in a way that's meaningful.
Just off what you were saying, I mean, kudos to them, but yeah, obviously they see it works for them financially as well. Someone wants to say, I went to this place, and you can see Instagram photos that I was in this location from the heritage display. And it's interesting too to also see again, in a way that is still the external, right? Like you're doing it for tourists, but are you doing it in your home? So it's great that hospitality is doing that, but what does it look like?
Yeah.
Come to be a home, and it made me think too of, I don't know if you saw, if people here saw the outrage or response to the redesigned lounge at the airport.
Oh, there was outrage?
I wish we could show. I don't know if we could put it up. But I think it was also nice to see Ugandans reacting to that, to say like, this is unacceptable.
Which portion of it? There was one,
it's like the VIP lounge that's been redesigned.
Which I didn't see those.
So not even my question, I'm sorry. But what you said made me think of that. I'll send you. Yeah.
Yes, please.
But I was thinking, I mean, in the book you do talk to people who are, purchasing objects for designing their homes to think ethically about where these objects come from and their stories. But could you also maybe talk to us about your experiences thinking about ethical partnerships with artisans? Mm-hmm. We have also artists who work with artisans often, and sometimes there's the presumption that, because we're both creatives, we can have any kind of relationship, even though there's still a power dynamic often. Right? So maybe could you talk about how you navigate the power differentials, and also maybe ways, examples of where you maybe did something that you wish you didn't, or learned from, that you would advise people to avoid in this kind of
probably so many examples. And for better or for worse, it's also one of those things that you just learn by trial and error. And you learn from your cohorts, you learn from your colleagues. And I consider other artisans and designers and small business owners my colleagues. Like, we're our own little gang. And especially when I started the business, I was, living in New York, working in New York, and I was really shoulder to shoulder with people doing similar work, whether that was fashion or visual art, etc. Almost every weekend, as I was doing different artisan markets and showcases like the one you hosted over the weekend at Anomo. But being in dialogue and really just seeking out our own community so that we could trade ideas and examples of what worked for me in this contract. So contracts is an essential part. Like, go into collaborations and partnerships with a contract. Don't be afraid to ask your other artisans or artists what they've included in their contract. Same thing once I really started formalizing my interior design practice, a friend of mine, Shamika, she literally sent me a template, like one of her templates that she had used on a contract. And so from there, I amended it based on how I work. But I at least, that was such a valuable thing for me, even for this book. My friend Hawa Hassan, shout out to Hawa, 2-time published author. She wrote in Bibi's Kitchen. She's of Somali descent, raised partially in Kenya, and then born in Somalia, raised in Kenya, and then came to the US as a young girl. She sent me her whole book proposal for her first book. And when I tell you that saved me probably months, at least months, not just of work, I still had to really put a lot of work into my proposal, but it just took out kind of an unnecessary barrier, just having that template and seeing how somebody else did it. To the point where when I submitted my proposal to my literary agent for the first time, she was amazed. She was like, wow, like, how did you know how to do this? And I was like, I used Hawa's, like my friend Hawa. She sent me her template. So we have to share information. We have to share information, practical information. And when it comes to those partnerships, literally like down to the nuts and bolts, like what return policies do you have? What what are your satisfaction policies? What do you do when you don't get paid on time? Like, and to the extent where, and the example that I will use is a collaboration with a Native American indigenous designer, a Dine designer. Dine is the name we're using now for the Navajo Native Americans, but there was an incredible collaboration with Naomi Glasses and Polo Ralph Lauren, who had historically been culturally appropriating Native American designs, and so they decided they wanted to atone, and they reached out, or they started an artist in residence program. So one of the benefits and the highlights of this program is that the design artisan and partner, they established the terms, and one of those terms is like, listen, we understand that you have a mass market, but we make things more slowly. So even them getting in line with like the quantities and the expectations around how long a trivet is going to take. I mean, the trivet is another example. Like, once I started having to reorder and wait for the production, I changed my listing and I said, this will ship in 4 weeks. And you'd be surprised, people wait. I think even the last day I was here, we had our meeting, I went home and I was nervous because there was an order for a bench that I couldn't finish before I came here. And I wrote to the lady and I was like, hey, sorry I couldn't ship this out to you before I left, but I'll be home in 2 months. And she was like, okay, I'll wait. But when I tell you, like, I was so nervous to ask, but then I remembered, because some of these other big companies, like the ones who are ripping off of Bamileke and producing in the Philippines and selling for $2,000, if you look at their sales terms, they say this item will ship in 4 to 8 weeks. And then even sometimes they'll extend it. Like, I've had interior design clients who have, bought a couch and they're waiting like 4 months for the couch, but they're waiting for the couch. So they'll wait for that piece of fine art. They will wait for the trivet. So, keeping really an eye on how other companies even are doing it. Talk to your friends, look in the catalog, look on the website, see what their terms are, see how they're wording and phrasing certain things, and use that. That's honestly how I've done so much of kind of the nuts and bolts of partnerships and setting like the business side, really that business angle. So I hope that helps you all and answers your question in part. Okay, thanks for the question. I know you had one. Who had one? How are we on time, by the way? Is this the last question? Yeah. Or maybe last two. Okay.
Yeah, I thank you so much. And I think the question I wanted to ask is a little bit simple. I think you've answered it in a way, but then it was more to do with towing the line between cultural appropriation and cultural appreciation. And I feel like it's a very complicated dynamic that we don't often acknowledge. So even when I saw the Bamileke sort of thing, this shop, it was about the cultural appropriation, right? But then you also have this Western people putting African decor in their house, which, obviously I love for it to be appreciated, but then there's always like, are we a costume or things like that? It's like just the thinking around how I would immediately acknowledge it. And I just wanted to ask how, for example, would you determine the difference between the cultural appropriation and cultural appropriation?
That's an excellent point. Did I turn this off? I think I did. Yeah, I did. Okay. That's an excellent question again. Thank you. So for me, that difference, and like you said, it's complicated. It can be a fine line, but it really starts at that commercial transaction portion. If you're buying an African cultural heritage object, you need to be buying it from an African or a company that has worked and sourced and honored decent and equitable fair terms with an African artisan or source. That's the first part. And you also have to be educated about it. So these are not like tangible things that when you walk into somebody's home, you will know who did they buy it from, and do they actually know what it's about. But that's really where it starts. And that's also why after the book introduction, I open up with that ethical guide that has 4 points that talk about, for the seller, knowing where the object is coming from, knowing the provenance, knowing who the artisan is, and to the extent that you can, ensuring that the artisan is African and not an Indian child making an African basket, or someone in the Philippines making a bamileke table. Knowing who is selling it, and what is their relationship to the object or their relationship to the source community. And then another good one too, or another one that I break down, the fourth pillar in that framework, is terminology. How is it spoken about? If I go to a website or if I go to a store and there's a tag and it says exotic African mask, I'm not getting it, because as far as I know, we're not talking about ourselves that way. We're not saying, things are even still saying primitive on them about Africa. I'm just like, cringe, we're not doing that. So those 4 key areas that I present in the book will guide people who don't necessarily know, or at least will get them on the right track, from my perspective and expertise, to purchase and source those African cultural heritage objects ethically. Again, this is a conversation about commerce and trade. I think, that's still one side of it. But on the very practical level, we want the objects to be produced because they're providing jobs. So if we make it too hard and too convoluted, then nobody's gonna want to buy them. Outside of here. In Uganda, I think it can very well be self-sustaining, but the more the merrier. But it's then these are the terms of engagement. These are the rules of engagement. This is who you should be buying from, and this is how you will be speaking about us. So in part, going back to Tessa's question, setting the terms, and once you have the, what did you call it, the mass, critical mass, yeah, in critical mass, we are all of these voices, and when we say this, and when we plant our flag, and we say these are our terms, and we say you will wait 2 months, and you will, speak about us this way, we'd be surprised. People get in line, but you have to say it with your head up and chest out in all of our voices, and they will do it. People will do it. I believe that, and I've seen it, and that's been my experience. So that's there. Thank you too.
Hi. First of all, I wanted to thank you for this talk and just sharing the story behind the book and everything with us. I find it very important for people just to know, and that's why my question is kind of similar to the question that was asked by the gentleman far left, which is about the ubiquity of this knowledge and these objects within Africa. Because I get right now you're advocating for things like patenting the name and ethical the circular economy around these objects even going outside Africa. I know it's one of the focuses, but it's I'm keen to know in your thoughts, just casually, do you imagine these interiors or just this knowledge being widely known by people within? Because in my head it's if people have that strong sense of identity, and they know that we can't keep our culture can't be stolen from us at this rate, we wouldn't even have to worry about it going there because it will just stay within. So is it a thing that you imagine could maybe, and I'm being totally idealistic here, but do you think it's something that could change with maybe change in policy or education, or I don't know, a decrease in globalization? Because for me, I think the increase in globalization kind of blurs the lines within all these identities, and people just get things, or the examples of homes, they decorate their homes based on what they think looks nice without knowing the importance of what they have here. Yeah. So it's in an ideal world, how do you imagine us getting to that level where I don't know. Do you kind of get what I mean?
Yeah, I do. I do know what you mean. And thank you for your question as well. I think part of that is reiterating the point of learning and teaching and preserving the value from the source. And we can't make light of the very intentional campaigns and propaganda that have been put in place for centuries to convince us otherwise. So I'm not gonna, I'm not saying this in a disparaging way, like, oh, we just don't know, or like, they just don't know how valuable, inherently the objects are. There's been, a lot of work for many centuries to make sure that we didn't value our culture and identity and heritage. And I think in reclaiming that, education is a tremendous component. And that's why you see even now in America, like what is on the chopping block now in so many ways is education. And to really de-educating the populace is the first way you begin to destroy creativity and critical thinking and self-awareness, cultural awareness. So by doing the opposite, I believe is how we retain and really create an antithesis to the hyper. Part of that too is looking and tapping into the diaspora, because I think one of the beautiful things about my experience being raised primarily in America, but having that strong sense of identity the entire time, is that I can zoom out. I can zoom out and I can kind of look at Africa as, not as a country, but I can see, and even, let's talk about, or use Uganda as the example, but why I opened up with those photos of our culture at home is because I never second guessed it. Like, that's the home that I grew up in. We didn't have Mona Lisa on the wall, or like somebody or something that was like completely not relevant to, and that's fine too. Like, if we love Mona Lisa, she can also be on the wall. That's fine. We don't just we're not only like forced to or obligated to only design or decorate with our cultural heritage objects too. Like, we can design or put with Italian or Danish. I love Danish furniture, for example. Like, a lot of the furniture in my home is Danish modern furniture, and like, I'm allowed to do that too as a Ugandan. But I'm not shunning my cultural heritage and design, and I see that happening a lot in favor of like really cheap things from China. And I think in order to reverse that, it really does start with the education, and it does start, I think it'll be incremental change. It's not gonna happen overnight. But again, showing it in the book, showing it in the magazines, because it's there. That's also why I shared some of the press hits that my work has been featured in for years. I was getting the press for over 10 years before the book came out. So that's not nothing new. But it's, I think social media can help as well, because that, to the extent with all of its flaws, is democratizing access to certain types of visuals. So, we need to be sharing more of that on social media, and I think that will continue to drive the point home that no, we can and should be owning and designing, decorating, wearing more of our cultural heritage at home.
Beyond the book, would you like to share about Accent Studio? It's quite interesting, actually.
Beyond the book, share Accent Studio?
Accent Studio. You want to share something?
Well, I feel like I don't.
Yeah, well, because there's sometimes reading about the book, and I checked it out.
Yeah.
It's a whole.
Yeah. So Accent Studio is the product-based primarily e-commerce business where I sell the objects that I either source directly from artisans throughout the continent. I've worked in 15 plus countries over the years. I founded XM Studio in 2011. And that's really what has brought the African decor to the press and to TV. And for many years, when I first started it, I was really one of the only people who was presenting African decor in, quote unquote, an elevated way, not just like, we're all going on safari kind of safari design, which doing it like it's fine, but and it was again a reflection of really a reflection of me, what my home looked like growing up, the way I was living in New York at the time, even the way that I was already seeing friends in and around the city, like designing and incorporating elements of their respective cultural heritage into design. So XN Studio, Lifestyle Without Borders, is the dedicated e-commerce space, and I also do wholesale, provide wholesale orders to different other stores around the U.S. And even internationally. I've had international orders in the U.K., Taiwan, throughout the world. But the crux is really the e-commerce site, where we also focus on small batch, and we set the terms, and we say you're gonna wait for this piece. Okay.
I don't know.
Use the mic, yeah, use the mic.
So my question is to do with especially the artisan, because we've talked about culture appropriation, appreciation, and like there's a time I watched an episode of the stream on Al Jazeera where they talk about the same, how Hamas is sold as an Israeli dish, Native American clothes are sold as Halloween costumes and stuff like that, Pocahontas and whatnot. Like, so basically, food, fashion, and the third thing, I've never seen it when it comes to things like decor. So, do the artisans even know that this is happening? Because we can talk about it all we want, but if